The bustling John F. Kennedy International Airport served as a stark contrast to Jack Thompson's stillness. He sat rigid in the terminal's black leather chair, his tailored suit marking him as different from the casual travelers around him. His eyes followed the rushing crowds without really seeing them, his mind drifting between quarterly reports and memories he usually kept locked away. The terminal's massive windows displayed a lineup of commercial aircraft, their massive forms blocking portions of the late afternoon sun. Jack checked his Patek Philippe watch, a reminder of his success, yet another hour wasted waiting for his delayed flight to San Francisco. The irony wasn't lost on him, a man worth billions couldn't control something as simple as airline schedules. His laptop bag sat unopened beside him. For once, work wasn't at the forefront of his mind. The quarterly board meeting he'd just left had gone well, another successful presentation about his tech company's growing market share. Yet success felt hollow today. Perhaps it was the date, exactly 10 years since he'd walked away from his family. Or maybe it was the young father he'd observed earlier, patiently explaining to his son how airplanes stayed in the sky. The terminal's announcements echoed overhead, a constant reminder of destinations and departures. Jack absently rubbed his left ring finger, a habit he'd never broken despite the decade that had passed since he'd removed his wedding band. His company, Thompson Tech, had grown from a startup to a major player in Silicon Valley. He'd achieved everything he'd set out to do professionally, but the cost of that success weighed heavily on him during quiet moments like these. A group of teenagers walked past, their laughter carrying across the terminal. Jack noticed how their phones, likely containing his company's processing chips, kept them connected to their world. The technology he'd helped create connected millions, yet he remained disconnected from the two people who mattered most. Across the terminal, movement caught his attention. A woman and a young boy entered through the sliding doors, their entrance unremarkable among the hundreds of others, yet Jack's breath caught in his throat. The woman's blonde hair was shorter now, styled differently than he remembered, but her walk was unmistakable. Sarah. She moved with the same confidence he remembered, her head held high as she guided the boy, Ethan, through the crowd. Jack's hands gripped the armrests of his chair. Ethan had grown so much. The toddler he'd left behind was now approaching his teenage years. The boy gestured animatedly as he talked to his mother, his enthusiasm visible even from a distance. Jack recognized Sarah's patient smile, the same one she'd given him countless times when he'd excitedly discussed new technological breakthroughs. The sight of them hit him with physical force. Sarah's professional attire suggested she'd maintained her career in marketing. The designer bag over her shoulder indicated she'd done well for herself. Ethan wore expensive sneakers and carried what appeared to be a high-end laptop bag. They weren't struggling financially. This observation brought both relief and a new wave of guilt. Jack remained frozen in his seat, his carefully constructed world of board meetings and technological innovations crumbling around him as he watched his past walk through the terminal. Sarah's laugh carried across the space, a sound that transported him back to Sunday mornings in their old apartment, before Thompson Tech, before the complications that had torn them apart. Ethan's features had matured, but Jack could still see traces of himself in the boy's profile. The way he tilted his head while listening to his mother, the subtle furrow of his brow when concentrating, these were mannerisms Jack recognized from his own reflection. The reality of missing his son's entire childhood hit him with renewed force, making his throat tighten with suppressed emotion. People continued to stream past him, creating a constant flow of movement that contrasted sharply with his stillness. Jack Thompson, the man known for bold business decisions and innovative leadership, found himself paralyzed by the sight of his former family, unable to decide whether to approach or remain hidden in plain sight. Jack's legs felt leaden as he stood from his chair, his usual confident stride replaced by hesitant steps. He adjusted his tie, a nervous habit from his early business days, and moved forward before stopping abruptly. Sarah and Ethan had settled near gate B15, their luggage arranged neatly beside them. The sight of Ethan pulling out a tablet and showing something to his mother made Jack's chest tighten. The distance between them, barely 30 feet, seemed to stretch endlessly. Jack observed their interaction with an outsider's perspective, noting how Sarah leaned in to look at whatever Ethan was showing her, her face lighting up with genuine interest. It was the same expression she'd worn years ago when he'd shown her his first prototype, before everything had gone wrong. Business meetings with hostile takeover attempts had never made him this nervous. Jack loosened his collar slightly, aware of how his perfectly pressed shirt now felt constricting. He watched as Ethan gestured enthusiastically at the tablet screen, presumably explaining something technical. The boy's passion reminded Jack of himself at that age, taking apart computers just to understand how they worked. A family brushed past him, forcing him to step aside. The father held his daughter's hand, guiding her through the crowd. The simple gesture made Jack acutely aware of all the moments he'd missed with Ethan. First steps, first words, first day of school, all lost to him because of choices he'd made, or rather, choices that had been forced upon him. Sarah looked up from the tablet, her eyes scanning the terminal in a casual sweep that suddenly froze when they landed on him. Jack felt his heart rate spike as recognition flashed across her face. The polite mask she typically wore in public, he'd seen it in the occasional news articles about her marketing firm, slipped for just a moment, revealing a complex mix of emotions he couldn't quite decipher. Ethan, still engrossed in his tablet, hadn't noticed the tension that now crackled through the air. He continued talking, oblivious to how his mother's posture had stiffened, how her hands had tightened almost imperceptibly on her armrest. Jack recognized these subtle changes in Sarah's body language. A decade apart hadn't erased his ability to read her. "Mom, look at this new processing speed, it's incredible." Ethan's voice carried across the space between them. The irony wasn't lost on Jack. His son was excited about technology that he himself had helped develop, without knowing his father's connection to it. Sarah placed a gentle hand on Ethan's shoulder, a protective gesture that made Jack's stomach clench. "That's fascinating, honey," she responded, her voice steady despite the situation. But her eyes kept darting back to Jack, who remained rooted in place, halfway between his abandoned seat and their location. "Who's that man, Mom?" Ethan's question cut through the ambient noise of the terminal. He'd finally noticed his mother's distraction and followed her gaze to Jack. His expression showed innocent curiosity, without any recognition of the man who had helped give him life. Sarah's response came after a slight pause, her voice carefully controlled. "An old friend, sweetheart." The words hit Jack like physical blows. Friend. Such a simple word to describe what they had been to each other. He watched as Sarah squeezed Ethan's shoulder gently, her wedding ring notably absent from her left hand. The announcement system crackled to life, announcing boarding for a flight to Chicago. The mundane airport activities continued around them, oblivious to the emotional drama unfolding in their midst. Jack realized he'd been standing in the same spot for several minutes, probably looking suspicious to security. He needed to make a decision, retreat to his original seat and let them continue their lives without him, or bridge the gap that 10 years had created. His feet made the decision before his mind could fully process it, carrying him forward toward his past and what might be his only chance at redemption. Each step felt like moving through deep water, the distance between them simultaneously too long and too short. "Hello, Sarah." Jack's voice came out steadier than he expected as he stopped a respectful distance from their seats. The fluorescent airport lighting highlighted the subtle signs of aging on both their faces, lines that hadn't been there 10 years ago. Sarah straightened in her chair, maintaining her composure with practiced ease. "Jack." Her response was neutral, but her hands clasped tightly in her lap betrayed her tension. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Business meeting in New York," he explained, then immediately felt foolish for stating the obvious. His attention kept shifting to Ethan, who watched their interaction with increasing interest. The boy's features were a perfect blend of both parents, Sarah's gentle eyes combined with Jack's strong jawline. "You look well," Sarah offered, breaking a moment of awkward silence. She smoothed her skirt, a nervous gesture Jack remembered from their early dating days. "The tech world seems to agree with you. I see Thompson Tech in the news quite often." Ethan's head snapped up at the company name. Thompson Tech. They make the best processors. Their new quantum computing division is revolutionary. His enthusiasm pierced the tension, making both adults turn to him. "Do you work there, sir?" Jack swallowed hard, looking to Sarah for guidance. She gave a slight shake of her head, barely noticeable to anyone who didn't know her well. "I'm familiar with the company," Jack responded carefully. "You seem very knowledgeable about technology." "Tom says I take after my mom's business sense and someone else's tech genes," Ethan said proudly, missing how both adults stiffened at the casual mention of Tom. Sarah cleared her throat. "Tom's my..." She hesitated, glancing at Jack. "We've been dating for 2 years now. He's a corporate lawyer." The information settled like lead in Jack's stomach. He'd known, logically, that Sarah would have moved on, but hearing it confirmed made it real in a way that hurt more than he'd anticipated. "That's good. I'm glad," he managed, the words tasting bitter. "He's pretty cool," Ethan added, still focused on his tablet. "He's teaching me about business law, though I prefer coding. Did you know Thomson Tech just released a new quantum processing architecture? The possibilities for AI development are incredible." Jack couldn't help but smile, pride mixing with regret. His son was excited about his life's work without knowing their connection. "The quantum computing field is fascinating," he agreed, falling into familiar territory. "The potential applications in artificial intelligence alone could revolutionize how we process data." Sarah watched their interaction, her expression unreadable. "Ethan, honey, why don't you go check out that bookstore we passed? I need to catch up with my friend for a moment." Ethan looked between them, clearly sensing the underlying tension but unable to understand it. "Okay, Mom. Nice meeting you, sir." He grabbed his wallet and headed toward the store, occasionally glancing back at them. Once Ethan was out of earshot, Sarah's composed facade cracked slightly. "He's brilliant, Jack. Just like you. Sometimes it's hard to watch, he has all your mannerisms when he's working on his computer." "Sarah, Jack started, but she held up a hand. "Don't. Please." Her voice was firm but not unkind. "Tom's been good to us. He's there for school events, science fairs, everything. He's planning to propose soon." She watched Jack's reaction carefully as she delivered this news. Jack felt the full weight of what he'd lost. While he'd been building his empire, another man had been there for his son's moments of triumph and disappointment. "Does he make you happy?" The question escaped before he could stop it. "He's consistent. Present. Safe." Sarah's answer was telling in what it didn't say. "He loves Ethan like his own. And Ethan loves him back," Jack stated rather than asked, his throat tight. "Yes." Sarah paused, considering her next words carefully. "You can't just walk back into our lives, Jack. Not after 10 years. Not after everything." "I know." Jack watched Ethan through the bookstore window, proudly showing his latest tech magazine selection to the cashier. "But seeing him today, seeing you. I never stopped thinking about you both." The conversation died as Ethan returned, clutching a magazine with Thomson Tech's latest quantum processor on the cover. Jack's eyes fixed on the image, he'd approved that design himself just months ago. "Mom, look. They've got an in-depth analysis of the quantum architecture." Ethan's excitement momentarily pushed aside the awkwardness of the situation. He opened the magazine, pointing to a complex diagram. "The way they've configured the qubits is revolutionary." Jack couldn't help himself. "Actually, the real innovation is in how they've managed quantum coherence at higher temperatures," he said, then caught Sarah's warning glance. "I mean, that's what the technical papers suggest." Ethan's eyes lit up. "You understand quantum computing? Everyone at school thinks I'm weird for being interested in it." He turned to his mother. "Mom, can Mr. I don't even know your name, sir." "Jack," he supplied quickly, avoiding Sarah's gaze. "Jack Thompson." If Ethan noticed the shared surname, he didn't show it. "Could Mr. Thompson explain some of this to me? Please?" "Tom tries, but he's more into contract law than technology." Sarah's fingers drummed against her armrest, a tell Jack remembered from their marriage, a sign of internal conflict. "Honey, I'm sure Mr. Thompson is busy with his own flight." "Actually," Jack checked his watch, "my flight's delayed another 2 hours." He kept his tone casual, professional, though his heart raced at the prospect of spending time with his son. "I'd be happy to discuss it, if that's all right with your mother." Sarah's internal struggle played out subtly across her features. She'd always been protective of Ethan, even before Jack's departure. Now, he could see her weighing the risks and benefits, probably questioning his motives. "Please, Mom." Ethan's eagerness was palpable. "Mr. Thompson actually knows what he's talking about. Most adults just nod and smile when I bring up quantum computing." Sarah's resistance crumbled slightly at her son's enthusiasm. "All right, but we stay right here in the terminal where I can see you." The pointed look she gave Jack carried years of unspoken history. They moved to a small table at the nearby airport cafe, within Sarah's line of sight. Ethan spread the magazine between them, pointing out various technical specifications. Jack found himself impressed by his son's grasp of complex concepts. See, the way they've configured the error correction. Ethan began explaining, his hands moving animatedly. Have you considered the role of quantum entanglement in that process? Jack asked, carefully guiding the discussion. Teaching his son, even in this limited capacity, felt both natural and heartbreaking. I've been trying to understand that part, Ethan admitted. The textbooks make it seem so abstract. Jack grabbed a napkin and pulled out his pen. Think of it this way, he began sketching a simple diagram. Quantum entanglement is like. He launched into an explanation he'd used in board meetings, simplified but not condescending. From her seat, Sarah watched them interact. Jack could feel her gaze, even as he focused on Ethan's questions. The boy's quick understanding and insightful queries proved he'd inherited more than just Jack's appearance. You explain things differently than my teachers, Ethan observed. They just quote the textbook, but you make it feel real, like you've actually worked with these systems. Jack caught himself before revealing too much. I've studied the field extensively, he said carefully. Technology has always been my passion. Mine too. Ethan's face lit up. Mom says I get too excited about it sometimes, but I can't help it. There's just so much possibility, you know. Like, imagine what we could do with true quantum supremacy in AI applications. The enthusiasm in Ethan's voice mirrored Jack's own at that age. He remembered taking apart computers in his parents' garage, dreaming of future innovations. Now his son sat across from him, sharing those same dreams without knowing their connection. You've got a good mind for this, Jack said softly, pride mixing with regret. Have you thought about where you'd like to intern when you're older? Thompson Tech, obviously, Ethan replied without hesitation. They're leading the quantum computing revolution. Mom says I need to focus on school first, though. Jack glanced at Sarah, who had moved closer to their table, presumably to monitor the conversation. Her expression was a complex mixture of emotions he couldn't quite decipher. Your mother's right, Jack said, though it pained him to side with a decision that might keep Ethan from his company. Strong foundations are important in tech. Every great innovation builds on basic principles. Sarah's approach to their table shifted the dynamic immediately. Ethan remained absorbed in the technical discussion, but Jack sensed her underlying concern. She placed a gentle hand on Ethan's shoulder, a subtle reminder of her protective presence. Honey, we should start heading to our gate soon, she said, though their boarding time was still an hour away. Jack recognized her tone, the same one she'd used years ago when trying to extract him from late-night coding sessions. But Mom, Mr. Thompson was just explaining quantum entanglement. Did you know that the new Thompson Tech processors use a revolutionary approach too? Ethan's excitement made him oblivious to the tension between the adults. Maybe we could exchange contact information, Jack suggested carefully, meeting Sarah's eyes. For technical discussions. The unspoken question hung in the air between them. Sarah's grip on Ethan's shoulder tightened slightly. I don't think that's... She began, but Ethan interrupted. Could we? Please, Mom. Mr. Thompson actually understands what I'm talking about. Even my computer science teacher gets lost when I bring up quantum computing. Ethan's pleading expression was eerily similar to Jack's own look when pursuing a new project. Sarah exhaled slowly, her internal struggle visible. Ethan, could you give us a minute? Why don't you check if the magazine shop has any other tech publications? Once Ethan was out of earshot, Sarah turned to Jack, her voice low but intense. What are you doing, Jack? You can't just walk back into his life like this. I'm not trying to disrupt anything, Jack defended, keeping his voice equally quiet. But Sarah, he's brilliant. He understands concepts that most adults struggle with. And he's passionate about the exact field the field you chose over us. Sarah cut in, then immediately composed herself. I'm sorry. That wasn't fair. But Jack, he has a life. A routine. Tom has been there for him, mentoring him. In law, Jack pointed out. Sarah, you can see where his interests lie. The way he lights up talking about technology, that's not something you can ignore. Sarah sank into the chair Ethan had vacated. I know. Trust me, I know. Sometimes when he's working on his computer, the expressions he makes, it's like looking at you 10 years ago. She paused, collecting her thoughts. But we can't just. Jack pulled out his business card, plain white, with only his name and contact information. No mention of Thompson Tech, just for technical discussions, he repeated. No pressure, no expectations. If you're not comfortable with it, I'll walk away right now. Sarah stared at the card, her fingers tracing the embossed letters. Tom's going to propose, she said suddenly. He told me last week. He wants to adopt Ethan. The news hit Jack like a physical blow. And what do you want? He asked, fighting to keep his voice steady. I want what's best for Ethan, she replied, avoiding the real question. Tom is stable, reliable. He's been there for every science fair, every parent-teacher conference, every moment I missed, Jack finished quietly. I know. But Sarah, he's my son. Seeing him today, talking with him. I can't just walk away again. You did it once before, she said, but there was more sadness than accusation in her voice. Things were different then. You know I didn't have a choice. Jack leaned forward, lowering his voice further. The company was under attack. The threats against you and Ethan. Stop, Sarah held up her hand. We can't do this here. Not now. She looked at the card again, then carefully tucked it into her purse. I'll think about it. That's all I can promise. Ethan returned, clutching another magazine. They had the special edition about AI integration. His enthusiasm paused as he sensed the atmosphere. Is everything okay? Everything's fine, honey, Sarah assured him, standing up. Mr. Thompson needs to prepare for his flight, and we should head to our gate. But Mom. Ethan started to protest. It's okay, Jack interrupted, forcing a smile. Your mother has my contact information. Maybe we can discuss technology again sometime. He met Sarah's eyes, silently pleading. We'll see, Sarah said noncommittally, but she didn't reject the possibility outright. Thank you for taking the time to explain things to Ethan. As they gathered their belongings, Ethan turned to Jack one last time. Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Nobody else really gets this stuff like you do. Jack watched them walk away, Ethan already nose-deep in his new magazine, Sarah's posture rigid with unresolved tension. He remained at the table long after they disappeared into the crowd, the ghost of their presence still lingering in the air. That evening, Sarah's modern Manhattan apartment felt smaller than usual. She watched Ethan at his desk, hunched over the magazines from the airport, his desk lamp casting a warm glow over his concentrated features. The similarity to Jack's working posture was undeniable, almost painful to witness. Ethan, she called softly, it's getting late. You should start getting ready for bed. Just 5 more minutes, Mom. This article about Thompson Tech's quantum architecture is incredible. He didn't look up, his finger tracing circuit diagrams. Mr. Thompson explained it way better than the magazine, though. He really knows his stuff. Sarah sank onto their living room couch, Jack's business card burning a hole in her purse. The weight of unspoken truths pressed against her chest. The apartment's walls, decorated with Ethan's science fair certificates and academic awards, seemed to mock her silence. Her phone buzzed, a message from Tom. How was your day? Missing you both. Dinner tomorrow. Her fingers hovered over the keypad. Tom represented stability, security, everything she'd worked to maintain for Ethan after Jack's departure. He attended every school event, helped with homework, never missed a birthday. Yet she couldn't ignore how Ethan had come alive during his conversation with Jack, displaying an enthusiasm that Tom's law discussions never quite sparked. Mom. Ethan's voice pulled her from her thoughts. He stood in the doorway to his room, magazine clutched to his chest. Can I ask you something? Of course, honey. She patted the space beside her on the couch. Mr. Thompson, he has the same last name as Thompson Tech. Is that just a coincidence? His question revealed more awareness than she'd credited him with. Sarah felt her chest tighten. What makes you ask that? The way he talked about the technology. It wasn't like he'd read about it, it was like he'd created it. Ethan's perceptiveness sometimes startled her. And he looks kind of like the photos of the CEO in the magazines, just older now. Sarah's hands trembled slightly. Ethan. And he looks kind of like me, he added quietly, his eyes fixed on the magazine cover. Around the eyes and jaw. The moment she'd dreaded for years had arrived, triggered by a chance encounter in an airport. Sarah struggled to find the right words, the perfect explanation she'd rehearsed countless times deserting her. Meanwhile, across town in his hotel suite, Jack sat at his desk, laptop open to Thompson Tech's latest quarterly reports, but his mind was elsewhere. He'd pulled up Ethan's social media profiles, what little was public. Science club photos, coding competition awards, a recent school newspaper article about his win at the state technology fair. His phone rang, his executive assistant with urgent updates about tomorrow's meetings. "Sir, the board is concerned about the quantum computing division's latest projections." "Cancel tomorrow's meetings," Jack interrupted, something he'd never done before. "All of them." "But sir, the shareholders." "Reschedule," he insisted, his eyes fixed on a photo of Ethan holding a first-place trophy for robotics. "Something more important has come up." Back in Sarah's apartment, she finally spoke. "Ethan, there's something we need to discuss. About Mr. Thompson, about your father. Is he really my dad?" Ethan's direct question caught her off guard. He'd always been more interested in circuits than soap operas, but here he was, cutting straight to the heart of the matter. Sarah nodded slowly, tears threatening to spill. "Yes. But honey, it's complicated. When you were very young. Why did he leave?" The hurt in Ethan's voice was raw, immediate. "I thought I knew," Sarah admitted. "For years, I thought I knew exactly why. But now." She fingered Jack's business card through her purse. Sometimes adults make choices that seem right at the time, or that they feel forced to make. In his hotel room, Jack opened his personal email for the first time in hours. Among the usual business correspondence was an unexpected message from Sarah, "We need to talk." About Ethan. About everything. His heart raced as he read the brief message. Below it was a photo, Ethan at his latest science fair, standing proud beside a quantum computing project. The project's title board read, "Exploring Thompson Tech's Quantum Architecture, the Future of Computing." Tom's call to Sarah went unanswered that night as she sat with Ethan, finally sharing the story she'd held back for so long. Not all of it, some truths were still too complex, too raw, but enough to begin bridging the decade-long gap. "Did you know?" she asked Ethan finally. "About him being your father?" "I suspected," Ethan admitted. "After talking to him about quantum computing. Nobody else ever understood me like that." He paused, fiddling with the magazine's pages. "Tom tries, but..." "Tom loves you," Sarah reminded him gently. "I know." Ethan looked up at her. "But he's not, he doesn't." "He's not your father," Sarah finished quietly. A week after the airport encounter, Jack sat nervously in a private room at New York's Museum of Science and Technology. Sarah had suggested the location for Ethan's first official meeting with him, neutral ground with subject matter that interested them both. The museum's quantum computing exhibit, ironically featuring Thompson Tech equipment, provided the perfect backdrop. Ethan entered first, his footsteps echoing in the quiet space. He carried his laptop bag and a folder bulging with papers. The confidence he'd shown discussing technology at the airport seemed slightly dimmed by the weight of knowing who Jack really was. "Hi," Ethan said simply, standing just inside the doorway. "Hi," Jack replied, equally uncertain. Father and son studied each other openly now, free from the pretense of their airport encounter. Sarah followed a few steps behind, maintaining her role as guardian of this fragile new dynamic. "Ethan has been working on a project," she said, breaking the tension. "He thought you might want to see it." Ethan moved to the table, pulling out his laptop and several detailed diagrams. "It's about improving quantum error correction," he explained, his initial nervousness fading as he slipped into technical discussion. "I've been studying Thompson Tech's current approach, but I think there might be a way to reduce decoherence by..." Jack leaned forward, genuinely intrigued as Ethan walked him through the proposal. The boy's understanding of quantum mechanics surpassed what Jack had expected, and some of his suggestions showed real innovation. This is impressive, Jack said honestly. Have you considered how this might affect processing speed? Actually, yes. Ethan pulled up a spreadsheet of calculations. I modeled it based on the current Thomson tech architecture. Sarah watched from her position near the door as father and son lost themselves in technical discussion. Their identical expressions of concentration, the way they gestured when explaining complex concepts, the similarities were almost overwhelming. Mom. Ethan called suddenly, pulling her from her thoughts. Remember when you couldn't understand why I spent 3 weeks obsessing over quantum entanglement last summer? Mr. Thomson, Dad, he did the same thing when he was my age. The word dad hung in the air, its first casual use making all three of them pause. Jack's eyes met Sarah's, seeking permission, approval, something to indicate he hadn't overstepped. Your father, Sarah said carefully, officially acknowledging the relationship, has always been passionate about technology. Just like you. The conversation shifted then, moving from pure technology to personal history. Ethan asked about Jack's early days in computing, his first inventions, the founding of Thomson Tech. Jack shared stories of taking apart computers in his parents' garage, of coding his first programs, carefully avoiding the painful topics of his departure and absence. Would you? Jack hesitated, glancing at Sarah. Would you be interested in seeing some of our current research? Not the public stuff, the real development happening in our labs. Ethan's eyes lit up, but he looked to his mother. Sarah stepped forward, her hands clasped tightly. That would have to wait, she said firmly. We need to take this slowly. Of course, Jack agreed quickly. I just thought. Tom's taking me to the state science finals next month, Ethan interjected, then immediately looked guilty for mentioning his almost stepfather. The room fell silent. Jack absorbed this information, nodding slowly. That's good. You should have support at these events. Does he understand your work? He tries, Ethan said diplomatically. He's more interested in the legal aspects of technology. Patents and stuff. Which is also important, Sarah added, her tone carrying a warning note. Jack held up his hands in surrender. Absolutely. The legal framework around quantum computing is complex and crucial. He paused, considering his next words carefully. Maybe I could attend as well. If that wouldn't make things uncomfortable. Sarah's expression tightened, but Ethan's face lit up. Really? You'd come? The quantum architecture is a big part of my presentation, and I could really use technical feedback. We'll discuss it, Sarah interrupted. For now, let's focus on today. The meeting continued for another hour, the conversation flowing more naturally as they all adjusted to their new reality. When it was time to leave, Ethan gathered his materials, hesitating before speaking. Could we do this again? He asked, looking between his parents. If your mother agrees, Jack said, deferring to Sarah's judgment. Sarah studied them both, her son's hopeful expression, Jack's careful restraint. We'll arrange something, she conceded. But remember, we have dinner with Tom tomorrow night. The reminder served its purpose, keeping them all grounded in the complexity of their situation. As they prepared to leave, Ethan surprised everyone by giving Jack a quick, awkward hug. Thanks for looking at my project. Dad, he said quietly, then hurried out to the museum proper, leaving his parents to process the moment. 2 weeks later, Jack entered his office at Thomson Tech's New York branch to find an email from Ethan. The subject line read, Quantum Error Correction Update, Important Breakthrough. The timestamp showed 3:27 a.m. Jack smiled, recognizing his own tendency to work through the night when excited about a project. He opened the email to find pages of detailed technical notes, complete with hand-drawn diagrams scanned from Ethan's notebook. The boy's insights were remarkable, showing an intuitive understanding of quantum mechanics that Jack hadn't possessed at twice his age. His phone buzzed, a text from Sarah, Ethan was up all night working on that project. Reminds me of someone else I used to know. He's exhausted but won't stop talking about quantum states. Before Jack could respond, another message appeared, Tom's concerned about how obsessed he's becoming with the technical side. Says Ethan's losing interest in their law discussions. Jack's fingers hovered over the keyboard. He chose his words carefully, should I speak with him about balance between technology and other interests? Sarah's response came quickly, that would help. He listens to you about these things. Could you come by the apartment this afternoon? Tom will be at court. The domestic scene Jack walked into hours later felt surreal. Ethan's textbooks and computer parts were scattered across the dining room table, a sight that transported Jack back to his own teenage years. Sarah stood in the kitchen, making coffee, the familiar routine bringing back memories he'd tried to suppress. Dad. Ethan looked up from his laptop, dark circles under his eyes betraying his all-nighter. Did you see my email? I think I found a way to reduce quantum decoherence by modifying the... First, Jack interrupted gently, sitting down beside him. Let's talk about sleep schedules and balance. Ethan's expression fell. Mom called you about that, didn't she? She's worried about you, Jack said. And she's right to be. Trust me, I've learned the hard way that burning yourself out doesn't lead to better innovations. Sarah joined them, coffee cups in hand. Tom says you've missed your last 2 law study sessions. Because I'm close to something important. Ethan protested. Dad understands, don't you? Sometimes you have to focus entirely on a project when you're making breakthrough progress. Jack caught Sarah's warning look. I understand the impulse, he said carefully. But part of being successful in technology is maintaining perspective. Legal knowledge, business understanding, these things matter too. That's what Tom keeps saying, Ethan muttered. But he doesn't get excited about the actual technology. Not like you do. Sarah set her coffee cup down with more force than necessary. Tom has been there for you, Ethan. 4 years. While you were learning to code, helping with science projects. I know, Mom, Ethan interrupted. And I appreciate everything he's done. But with Dad back. He trailed off, realizing the impact of his words. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken implications. Jack studied his coffee, aware that his presence was complicating the careful balance Sarah had maintained for years. The gala is next week, Sarah said finally. Tom's law firm is hosting, and he's expecting us both to attend. The gala, where Tom planned to propose. Jack had almost forgotten. Of course, he said quietly. Ethan needs to support Tom. And you. Actually, Ethan spoke up, I was hoping you could come too, Dad. I'm supposed to give a short presentation about the intersection of technology and law. Tom arranged it, but I'd really like your perspective there. Jack looked to Sarah, who seemed equally surprised by the request. Honey, she began, I'm not sure that would be appropriate. Please, Mom. Ethan pressed. Dad's input would make the presentation so much better. And Tom's always saying I need to bridge the gap between technology and law. This would do exactly that. Sarah's expression showed her internal struggle. Having Jack at the gala would complicate Tom's planned proposal, but denying Ethan's request could create resentment. I wouldn't want to intrude, Jack offered, giving Sarah an exit. No, she said suddenly, surprising them both. Ethan's right. If he's going to discuss the relationship between technology and law, having perspectives from both fields would be valuable. She met Jack's eyes. But we need to be clear about boundaries. Always, Jack agreed, understanding the layers of meaning in her words. As they discussed the details of the gala, Jack noticed a photograph on the wall he hadn't seen before, Ethan and Tom at a law firm event, both wearing suits and smiling. The image served as a reminder of everything he'd missed, of the life Tom and Sarah had built without him. Dad. Ethan's voice pulled him back to the present. Will you help me prepare the presentation? I want to show everyone how quantum computing could revolutionize legal data processing. Looking between his son's eager face and Sarah's cautious expression, Jack realized they were balanced on a precipice. The gala wouldn't just be about Tom's proposal anymore, it would be a collision of past and present, of competing futures and unresolved emotions. The evening of the gala arrived with an air of inevitability. The Grand Plaza Hotel's ballroom glittered with New York's legal elite, their conversations a steady hum beneath crystal chandeliers. Jack adjusted his tie in the lobby's mirror, Thompson Tech's latest quarterly report running through his mind, anything to distract from what awaited inside. Dad. Ethan's voice carried across the marble floor. He hurried over, tablet in hand, looking uncomfortable in his new suit. I made some last-minute adjustments to the presentation. Can you look them over? Ethan, Tom's voice followed, his tone carefully pleasant. Let's not overwhelm Mr. Thompson before the event even starts. He approached them, every inch the successful lawyer in his tailored tuxedo. Jack, I appreciate you coming to support Ethan's presentation. The men shook hands, their grips perhaps firmer than necessary. Tom's other hand rested protectively on Ethan's shoulder, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed by Jack. The intersection of quantum computing and law is an important topic, Jack replied diplomatically. Ethan's insights could benefit both industries. Sarah appeared then, stunning in a midnight blue gown. Her entrance caught all three males' attention, though for different reasons. Tom's face softened with obvious love, Jack's with lingering regret, and Ethan's with simple teenage embarrassment at his mother looking so formal. The presentation starts in 20 minutes, she reminded them, smoothing Ethan's collar with practiced efficiency. Her fingers brushed against the silver necklace Jack had given her 12 years ago. She'd probably worn it without thinking, out of habit. Tom noticed the necklace too, his expression flickering briefly. Shall we head in? The managing partners are eager to meet Ethan. The ballroom was a sea of dark sue. It's an evening gowns. Heads turned as they entered. Tom was well known in legal circles, and despite Jack's attempts at discretion, several people recognized the CEO of Thompson Tech. Whispers followed their unusual group. There's the podium, Ethan pointed, his nervousness finally showing. Dad, could you check the quantum processing diagrams one last time? I want to make sure they're clear enough for a non-technical audience. I can help with that, Tom offered quickly. I've been studying up on quantum computing basics. The tension thickened. Sarah intervened smoothly, why don't you both look it over? Different perspectives could be valuable. As Jack and Tom huddled over Ethan's tablet, their forced cooperation evident in their stiff postures, Sarah pulled Ethan aside. Honey, remember what we discussed? Tonight is important for Tom. I know, Mom, Ethan sighed. The proposal. But it's important for Dad too. Do you know he's incorporating some of my error correction ideas into Thompson Tech's next generation of processors? Sarah's expression complicated. That's wonderful, honey. But Tom has been planning this evening for months. He loves you very much. I love him too, Ethan said quietly. But he's not. He glanced at Jack, who was pointing out something on the tablet screen while Tom nodded with slightly too much enthusiasm. He's not your father, Sarah finished. I know. But that doesn't make his love for you any less real. The room's atmosphere shifted as the managing partner of Tom's firm took the podium. The evening's program was beginning. Tom straightened, reaching into his pocket where Jack knew the ring waited. Before we begin, the managing partner announced, one of our most promising partners has a special announcement to make. Tom stepped forward, but Ethan chose that moment to grab both Jack's and Tom's arms. My presentation's starting too. Come on, I need you both near the front. The two men found themselves being dragged toward the stage by an excited teenager, while Sarah watched with a mix of amusement and anxiety. The managing partner, seeing Tom's predicament, quickly adjusted. But first, we have a fascinating presentation on the future of legal technology from a very promising young man. Ethan, if you would. Ethan bounded onto the stage, his earlier nervousness forgotten in the excitement of sharing his ideas. Jack and Tom stood awkwardly side by side in the front row, both trying to focus on Ethan while being acutely aware of each other's presence. The future of legal data processing lies in quantum computing, Ethan began confidently. And I'm fortunate to have insights from both fields represented here tonight, Tom, who's taught me so much about law, and my father, whose work in quantum computing at Thompson Tech. A murmur ran through the crowd. Many knew Tom had been planning to announce his intention to adopt Ethan. Now, the teenager had inadvertently revealed his biological father's identity to the entire room. Sarah's hand found the silver necklace again, twisting it nervously as she watched the scene unfold. The carefully orchestrated evening was veering off script, years of secrets and separate lives colliding in public view. The silence that followed Ethan's announcement was deafening. Sarah watched as understanding rippled through the crowd. The CEO of Thompson Tech was not just a supporter of Ethan's project, but his biological father. Tom's hand, which had been reaching for the ring box in his pocket, dropped to his side. Ethan, oblivious to the tension he'd created, continued his presentation with enthusiasm. By combining Thomson Tech's quantum architecture with legal database management. His voice carried clearly through the stunned room. In the second row, Richard Chen, Sarah's old friend from her marketing days, leaned forward with sudden recognition. He'd been there during the early days of Thomson Tech, before everything fell apart. His eyes darted between Jack and Sarah, pieces of a decade-old puzzle finally clicking into place. "Sarah," he whispered urgently, catching her arm as she passed. "The Henderson lawsuit, it wasn't about patent infringement at all, was it?" Sarah froze, memories flooding back. The lawsuit that had coincided with Jack's departure, the threats that had seemed to come from competitors but had darker origins. On stage, Ethan was reaching the conclusion of his presentation. And that's why quantum computing will revolutionize legal data processing. Any questions? A hand rose from the back of the room. Martin Henderson himself stood up, his presence unexpected and unwelcome. "I have a question about Thomson Tech's early quantum computing patents," he said smoothly. "Particularly those filed around the time of certain organizational changes." Jack stepped forward, his stance protective. "This isn't the appropriate forum for..." "Actually," Ethan interrupted, "I found something interesting while researching those early patents." He pulled up a new slide, one neither parent had seen before. The quantum processing architecture we use today was originally designed to decrypt something specific, a series of threatening emails sent to Thomson Tech executives and their families. The room went completely still. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth as Ethan continued, his voice steady despite the weight of his revelation. "I didn't understand at first why someone would build such a specific decryption system. But then I found the original emails in an encrypted folder on Mom's old laptop. They threatened her and me if Dad didn't step away from the company." Tom moved forward, lawyer instincts kicking in. "Ethan, perhaps we should." "No," Ethan said firmly. "Everyone needs to know. Dad didn't abandon us, he left to protect us." Henderson Technologies was using shell companies to threaten families of Thomson Tech executives. The quantum decryption system proved it, but by then, the damage was done. Jack stared at his son in amazement. "How did you?" "I'm your son," Ethan said simply. "And Mom's. Did you really think I wouldn't figure it out? The quantum architecture had your signature all over it, Dad. You built it to protect us, even if you couldn't tell us why." Sarah stepped forward, tears in her eyes. "Jack, all these years..." Martin Henderson was already moving toward the exit, but security, quietly called by Tom, blocked his path. Tom himself stood straight, his proposal forgotten as he processed this new information with a lawyer's precision. "The statute of limitations hasn't expired on corporate extortion," he said clearly. "And I believe we have a room full of witnesses to this confession." The next hours passed in a blur of statements and revelations. Henderson was taken into custody, years of carefully hidden evidence brought to light by a teenager's brilliant decryption work. The gala transformed into an impromptu reunion, with old Thomson Tech employees stepping forward with their own pieces of the puzzle. As the chaos swirled around them, Sarah found herself facing both Jack and Tom. "I never knew," she whispered. "All these years, I thought." "I couldn't tell you," Jack said softly. "The threats were explicit, if I contacted you or Ethan in any way. But now everyone knows." Ethan joined them, his presentation forgotten in the gravity of the moment. "We can be a family again." He paused, looking at Tom. "All of us, in our own way." Tom pulled the ring box from his pocket, studying it thoughtfully before speaking. "Sarah, I was going to ask you something tonight. But I think there are conversations that need to happen first." Sarah looked between the two men who loved her, and the son who had unraveled a decade of secrets. The silver necklace caught the light, no longer a reminder of what was lost, but perhaps a bridge to what could be. "We have a lot to talk about," she agreed. "All of us." Ethan smiled, pulling up one final slide on his presentation. It showed a quantum circuit diagram, but hidden within its complexity was a simple message: family isn't about biology or legality, it's about love, truth, and second chances.